He was so well known. He had a bunch of kin folks here, you know, and everybody knew. And there was Grover, Frank, and he had about 5 or 6 brothers, and then sister-in-laws, and you know, everybody from, a lot of people from Live Oak, you know. Most of Oakland Park was from Live Oak, you know. We lived in Swanee County for a long time. I was born in Swanee County. And, but we didn't live close to Live Oak. But he had so many people from Live Oak, you would never win against him.
Followed South for a long time. But even the people from up north come here and say, everybody's a Democrat? Well, put me down Democrat. 32, he served a year councilman or city commissioner. And he said about the only thing he could remember is one of the mayor's brothers proposed that they cut the mayor's salary from 5 down to 3. People weren't paying their taxes, and the 5 councilmen were cut from 3 down to $2 a month because they didn't have money.
I got the job of city clerk. Well, I went to work for the city, first of all. I went to work for the city in the mid-1950s. The people at that time, there was Esther Erickson, who was the city clerk, and Elizabeth Tucker. Mrs. Tucker had been the city clerk, and at that time you had to run for the job. And she had been city clerk, had been elected several times, and she decided she didn't want to do that anymore. So she said, Esther, if you'll take that over, I'll help you. And then they hired my sister and also another lady who lived out here, Ruby Woodworth. And I started working for them by doing some typing, because I was a pretty good typist. Right, I started to work at $1 an hour. I got a raise to $1.10 very shortly thereafter. She decided that I was worth it. But I was the only person in the city hall that could who did hit the keys hard enough to be able to make an original and 6 legible onion skins. I banged the typewriter. My father was on the city council at one. In there one time, I was working for the city when he got elected, and he only stayed for a 2-year term. He didn't. He said no. He'd done his duty. He wasn't going to do anymore. When we were moving over to the new city hall, where it is now, the city hall at that time had been located on Northeast 37th Street. And when we were moving, no, 36th Street, I took the job as assistant. When Mrs. Erickson retired, I became city clerk. My responsibilities as city clerk were I was responsible for all city elections, for taking the minutes of all the meetings, for doing all the advertising if it's required for the city, to keep the ordinances and the resolutions numbered and up to date and codified, to set up dates for all of the public hearings. So it changed before I became city clerk. When Mrs. Erickson was here, at that time she was everything. When I say there were 4 people, that was all of the office personnel for the city of Oakland Park. We were responsible for so much. She was also the finance officer. That was changed. The finance was taken away. I still had all the insurance for the city. We were responsible for taking care of all the insurance, compensation type and health insurance and everything. That was, as I said, that was taken out. We no longer, when they developed a building department, we no longer had to do building permits. When I first started work for the city, we did our own tax assessing and collecting. So that's one of the things I did was type tax rolls. The county then took that over until the 1960s. Oakland Park had its own voting registration. It was separate from the counties. That I was sorry to see go to the county, because we were able to keep, I was able to keep it very current. I mean, I knew if someone died, I knew they had died, because there was a notice in the paper or whatever, and I checked those things. I was able to keep track of things in that way. The city clerk's office also issued the permits for liquor licenses to operate past a certain time. And since the city also received from the state a percentage of the liquor license, I kept very close track to be sure that we were getting the percentage we were supposed to, because I'd get a check and I'd think, that doesn't look big enough, and I'd start looking it over and I'd say, oh, they missed this one, they put it into Fort Lauderdale and we were supposed to get that $400, you know, or whatever. Anyhow.
So you ran a tight ship.
I did.
And he felt like, you know, with his, and he had handled the city's insurance, had kind of a ground floor knowledge of the city and the employees and, you know, what they were doing and where, and felt like with his business background and his financial background that he could bring a lot to help the city, because at that time there was an electrician, an insurance man, contractor. I can't remember who the other two were, but I mean, that was the composition of the council. Oh, a tile man and a handyman. So he thought, you know, that maybe he could help.
The zoning board for quite a while, and you know, like you see people doing things that it didn't look like that couldn't be done a little better this way instead of that way, and so I put my oar down, and first thing you know, I was a council member, and wasn't a council member for too long, and I became mayor. I became the president, and I was a founder of it, of the League of Cities. It's where if Oakland Park is having a problem about some kind of a traffic thing or something, and they see that Wilton Manors has got a way that's working a little better, and Plantation was used, it was for the big city out west, it was the one you went to see, well, how is Plantation doing that?
We're putting everything on computers. This is the beginning of the computer age, and they were going to be modern. So they were putting everything on computer, but it wasn't working very well. And they had not sent a water bill out in 6 months because they couldn't do the billing. So when I went to work, they had just sent the water bills out, and the people were all calling to say, what is this? And they were pretty well handling that. But at the same time, they were putting all the property taxes on computer. Those days, it was computer cards, punch cards. And there was a school, and all the property records the city had were on cards, about 5x8 file cards, all property information. They were invaluable. Got thrown away later inadvisedly. Those were sent in groups to the school. The students did the key punching, educational school of some sort, and they came back, and then we had to prove them. And we proved them, and about half of them went back again, and we just kept doing that. And finally they said, this is too much, it's getting too close. And so that's when the property taxes were turned over to the county. And the county picked it up. We didn't have any problems. I don't know how they did it, but they did it. And I went down to the building department and worked for the building department for a number of years. And at that time they had part-time inspectors, and the fire chief had been the building official, and they just had separated that so there was a separate position. And I felt like we needed a city engineer, so I promoted that for a while. And with my husband on council, I could bend an ear, and we finally got a city engineer. And
well, the first thing you learn when you come to work in the city of Oakland Park is you didn't discuss anybody, because they're all related somewhere. So you had to be careful what you said. But the people at the time that I started here, I was like an outsider. I have no relation working in the city at all. I started here, they were all real friendly. It was like a family affair. I mean, everybody was on first name basis. It didn't matter who they were, the mayor or the city attorney or whoever they were first name basis. As the city got bigger, then they started to say, we can't do that anymore. Now it's got to be more formal. And the people that did join when I was in the city, when I was there, they stayed because it was a family affair type thing. Now people come here and they get a few years of training and they get a better opportunity. So I walked down to see what was going on, and the fire chief approached me and said, we need men. So I went and joined the volunteer fire department. That was 1954. At that time, there was one paid member, that was Chief Bailey. The rest of us were all volunteers. The first fire truck they had was a 1934 Cadillac car that had been converted. When I joined in 1954, they had got rid of it, and they had two 1946 and a 1947 Chevy fire trucks. They had a fire station on the corner of 36 Northeast 36th Street and 11th Avenue. And they had a large siren up on top of the building. If somebody had a fire, there was a button right in between the doors in the front of the fire station. You push the button, it would set the siren off, and then everybody would go to the station to get the fire trucks. And sometimes you'd have 2 guys, sometimes 10, depending on the time of the day or whatever. And at that time, we had very few fire hydrants. The city had its own water supply. The hydrants in the area of the city were fine, but when you got on the outside, a little ways out of the city, you didn't have any fire hydrants at all. We didn't have any breathing apparatus to speak of. We had some old U.S. government reject stuff. But none of the self-contained that they have today. Most of the fire departments would come in to help. The trucks weren't compatible, the fittings weren't compatible, so you were on your own even though you were in a different city. And now they have standardized most of it where everybody can work together. But there was daytimes. You would have maybe 2 or 3 volunteers show up. People would be working. At night, you might have 8 or 10 show up, depending on who was in town, who was out. But it was very unreliable, but it the best they could do at the time. Well, I made the commitment to join the fire department, just like everything else. I do things, and then then later it's too late to back out. But I said, well, yeah, I'll come over and help. So I showed up at the fire drills, and we had drills all the time, and we showed up at them, and then it just got involved where I was doing the maintenance on the trucks, and then so it just finally, when they went paid, I just went ahead and joined the paid fire department. There was probably like 20 volunteers at the time. When they went paid, there was only four members and the chief, 5 total, and then we had about 6 or 7 volunteers that stayed on that helped the paid men. Wife thought I was crazy. I quit a job making $3 an hour, $120 a week, and went to work for the city fire department for $60 a week and working 72 hours. But the benefits is what I was looking for. Well, the city was starting getting a little bit bigger, and there was a little dissension in the volunteer fire department, so the city decided that they would go ahead and put on a paid department and use the volunteers as backups. And at that time, the fire chief, Chief Bailey, was just, he was the volunteer chief. They just went ahead and made him the fire chief of the city department, and then they hired any of the volunteers that wanted to come on. There was no big test, or in fact my application for employment I think I filled out in something like 1966 or 67, they discovered I didn't have an application in for an employment. So I had to fill that out. They was trying to help get more coverage for the city. At the same time, they had just started their police department. They had like 5 men on the police department, so they were real young starting off as far as the services for police and fire went. You couldn't give them away. Nobody wanted it for that pay. We were talking, 75 cents an hour. Nobody wanted that. So he was made volunteer fire chief, I believe, in 1948, and he was chief until about 1984 or 85. So it was quite a span. He was a pretty nice fellow to work for. I mean, if you did your job, he didn't bother anybody. Just get the work done, and that was it. And I had a real good working relationship with him. Him and I built the first rescue truck in 1963. Took a Ford E300 van, remodeled it. We built all the cabinets inside and everything. Made a rescue truck out of it. Later on, we built one for a crime scene van for the police department. We'd done this on off-duty hours. I would get off my job and I'd go over to his house and we'd build these things over there. So I worked with him quite a bit. But if you did your job, you were okay. When I first went on the paid fire department, there was 4 firemen. We worked 8-hour shifts. One was a relief that pulled the off-duty hours for the other men. We dispatched the police department, radio dispatched them. If we had a fire call, we set the alarm off, the fire siren off, radioed the police car. He would come in and sit on the desk while we went out and fought the fire. This made for bad situations sometimes when they only had 1 or 2 policemen on, because you had no traffic control once you got to the fire scene because he was back at the station. But they took care of that before too long. I believe about 1960 we started a scuba team. Drowning here in Oakland Park. A little boy fell off the seawall and drowned. We had nothing to go into search or recovery or anything. At the time we had a women's auxiliary. The women's auxiliary bought the first set of scuba gear that the city had. When the city seen that the women was coming up with this, they bought 2 more sets of gear. So it was whoever was there used the gear, and we wasn't really trained like they are today. They didn't have the training then. We just had to learn on our own. At the time we were referred to as the darlings of Broward County because we ran the whole Broward County if there was a drowning or anything, because there was no other dive teams in the area. We were the first one in the county. In 1963 is when we started our first rescue truck. It was just over coffee one morning. The fire chief and a couple of us said, we need something. So we decided to get together. We went to, several of us went down to Fort Lauderdale, Broward General Hospital, and took courses in first aid, advanced first aid, and then into what they call emergency medical technicians. Later on, we went to Northridge under Dr. Lee and got paramedic degrees. We built the first rescue truck. Then we pretty well wore it out, and the city bought another new one. And then from then on, now they have always buy them because they're too complicated to build anything like that anymore. My paramedic degree or certificate number is 453, I think it is, which is way early ones. Now they're up into the thousands and hundreds of thousands probably.